Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This will be a little bit of a different video talking about a road trip to northern BSC I recently took, a total of about 2,750 kilometers. So I'll be talking about some of the terrain, the scenery, some of the things I saw, try to answer a lot of the questions that I've had people ask me about. So as a refresher, my car is a mid-range Model 3, so it gets 390 kilometers on a charge now, roughly. So I'll talk a little bit about the route I took and some of the things we encountered. So here's a bridge that was washed out during the last floods last year. What we're looking for is premium plus electrons. Try to get to the source of all those electrons we use, find out where they come from. This is following some transmission lines up. Here's the WAC Bennett Dam in Hudson Hope. And here's some beautiful wind turbines we came across on a trip. And that's where the really clean electrons come from, of course. And also looked at how Site C is progressing, possibly not quite as clean as the wind turbines, but still fairly clean hydroelectric power. Up in northern BC, there's no superchargers. We're trying to get to Fort St.John, last superchargers in Prince George, so I'll show you how some of that worked. Of course, we'll need our Chetwynd adapter, and we ran into a few low charge scenarios. So let's get started. If you have any questions about any of it as we go along, just leave them in the comments. So we left the ferries with about 85% charge after having the heat on while we were on the ferry. First destination here is Hope, BC at the supercharger. So all this video is pretty much running at double speed, and I was on FSD 10.11.2 for the whole trip up. By the time we got into Hope here, we were down to about 35% charge, I believe. So this little clip is showing one of the glitches in general. On the way up, it had the standard kinds of disengagements that we've seen in the past number of videos. There's an example of it swerving to the right for no reason. And you can see in the graph there it got worse as we got further north in BC. So that might be because there's just not as many Teslas up there driving to give it feedback, but I'm not really sure. So we supercharged in Hope, and then we continued on with about 60% charge, heading to the Red Hill Rest area, which has some nice free flow chargers. Here's just some of the scenery up in that area for those that might not have driven this part of the world. This is the Fraser Canyon between Hope and Cache Creek. So some pretty interesting scenery along the way. So let's have another look at that charger map that we have of BC. So you can see all the way up to Prince George, there's now plenty of chargers. There's a mix of Tesla superchargers, the BC Hydro Fast chargers up to 50 kilowatts, and some flow chargers. So the next charging station we're heading to here is just south of Cache Creek, and it's two very nice flow chargers that are free at this point still, so we'll try those out. Here you can also see some evidence of the washouts and flooding that we had in BC last year. There's still some temporary bridges that they're still working on, and it's been almost a year since that time. So you can imagine the kind of damage that's done. And unfortunately, right now, the temperatures in northern BC are going up again, and there's some heavy rain coming, so there might be more flooding again this year. So here we're coming into Lytton, BC here. You can see this is where the forest fire went through last year. All the trees in the area are burnt. I didn't drive into the actual town of Lytton. That's a little bit off to the side of the road. But as pretty much everybody probably knows, the entire town of Lytton was destroyed last year in the forest fires. My heart goes out to all those that were impacted by that and other disasters in the area. Here's a bit more scenery as we get out of the really tight parts of the Fraser Canyon into the slightly flatter parts coming up here, approaching Cache Creek. So I pulled into the Red Hill Rest area in a few minutes here, and tried out the charger, the flow charger with my Chetwynd adapter, It worked for about 20 minutes at 45 kilowatts, which is max charge rate that the adapter supports, but then it kicked out for some reason. So I decided to continue on to Cache Creek and charge up at the Tesla supercharger there. At the supercharger, I maxed out at 205 kilowatts. So that's always the easiest and fastest for Teslas to charge at the superchargers. There's no cards, no tapping. You just plug in the charger and it charges it to your account automatically. So here, after leaving Cache Creek, we left with about 56% charge. And the reason it's only 56% is because the lowest charge, the lowest part of the battery always charges the fastest. So what you want to do is just charge enough to make it to your next destination. So in this case, I put enough charge in to make it to 100 Mile House, which was my next location. And I always like to leave about 10% buffer, 10 to 15% buffer to make sure I arrive at a low state of charge, but in case anything happens in terms of headwinds or delays on the road, I still have enough so I don't get stranded. That's worked out fairly well for me so far. A few minutes ago you saw a mistake on FSD where it got into the left turn lane instead of going straight, which I've seen quite a few times. In 100 Mile House, I decided to charge up to 94% just because the charger happens to be free there and I was having dinner anyway, so I had some extra time. So that gave me enough to hopefully make it to Prince George here with about 11% remaining, as you can see on the screen there. There are quite a few chargers between 100 Mile House and Prince George, so I wasn't really worried about running out of charge even pushing it that low. The other thing you can see here, it's probably hard to see on the screen, that the average consumption on the trip is still very much in line with the estimated consumption that Tesla uses to show their display, their estimated kilometers remaining display, which is 150 watt hours per kilometer for my car. So we're actually on the entire trip, the 2,750 kilometer trip, the average consumption was 147 watt hours per kilometer. So even at full highway speeds, I'm still able to make that efficiency, which was interesting. Okay, next I'll show you a few FSD glitches. You can see this truck here is stopped in my lane ahead, and FSD made no attempt to move over or slow down. Coming at it at 100 kilometers an hour, I had to take over. The next one I also saw a number of times where FSD turns into the right turn lane even though it's supposed to be going straight. I guess it might think it's a passing lane. So that must be a map issue at this point. Hopefully that gets fixed pretty soon. When I arrived in Prince George, I had 40 kilometers of range remaining, which was pretty much what I expected. You can see another FSD glitch here. The car turns into the left turn lane and heads straight for that median. So you really still have to be paying quite a bit of attention with this version. 10.11.2 this was, and even 10.12.2, same thing. In Prince George, I charged up overnight at the level 2 charger at the hotel. That took 9 hours to get back to 100%. The distance between Prince George and the next charger, which is past Chetwynd, is about 335 kilometers. And the nav told me right off the get-go that I would arrive there with only 5% charge. So along the way I was being pretty careful, but I still continued at full speed. I did watch it fairly carefully to make sure I didn't have to slow down along the way. So this is currently the only charger between Prince George and that East Pine Rest area. There are a few more coming in the future. Probably by next year there should be one in the middle there. Along the way you get some amazing scenery, especially around the Pine-le-Moray Provincial Park area. So here I am pulling into the rest area where those 25 kilowatt Ministry of Transportation chargers are. It was a relief to pull into there. I arrived with 4% charge, which is pretty much exactly what the car predicted when I began the trip. And of course the warning came on for low battery immediately, and luckily the chargers were working. So thank you to Ministry of Transportation for putting these here. to make this trip possible. So it took about an hour at the East Pine charger to get enough charge to get up into Fort St. John because it is only 25 kilowatts. As we're pulling into Fort St. John here, you can see a number of problems with the road lines being very, very faint or pretty much non-existent. So FSD had quite a problem with weaving all over the road in that type of condition. So I wonder how they'll fix that in the future. Interestingly enough, on the way up here, I did install 10.12.2 and it had the same problems or quite a bit worse even in some cases. Here's an interesting middle grade bridge which FSD actually did quite well over, even though of course it can't see any lines. It can seemingly see the tire tracks that are on the bridge. The next day I got the download of 10.12.2, so I was excited to try it out to see how much better the car would drive on the new version. So I decided to take a drive out towards Hudson Hope because I wanted to see some of the terrain out that way that would be flooded in the future. I'll talk about that in a minute. But unfortunately, because of the poor road lines or something, you can see the car is completely on the opposite side of the road here. Even though the car can clearly see the width of the road, so I'm baffled why it couldn't just bias to the right of the road here. After all this time of testing, I was pretty disappointed that it would still be doing something like this on a road, despite not having great lane markings. So you can see the same type of swerving here a couple more times, and I just had to take over for part of this. The sun is also in the cameras, but you can see in the visualization that it can clearly see the road and the edges. So moving over to the left side, I just can't see any real reason or excuse for that type of thing. So the other reason I wanted to drive this road, as I mentioned, is because Site C Dam construction is coming along, and it is supposed to start filling the reservoir at the end of 2023 according to the schedule. So that means a lot of the existing highway in the valley there will be flooded, so I wanted to try to drive that road before it does. Here's one example of a new bridge that's going in on the back corner of the picture there, and some of the land that's green in the bottom there unfortunately will be flooded. Here's a clip of the drive down that same little section. You can see the new bridge. This is one of the 1 kilometer long bridges. There's a number of others, especially along the creeks along this section, and along the entire river you can start to see the clearing is happening of the vegetation and trees along either side of the parts that will be flooded. That's something they're doing now compared to in the past when they simply flooded it without removing the vegetation, which causes a lot of problems. Down at the bottom of the valley here, I came across a moose and her calf, which was pretty neat to see, as well as a number of bears along this stretch between Fort St. John and Hudson Hope, as well as some type of wild boar, which I'd never seen before. Here's one last clip of that drive showing one of the bridges closer to Hudson Hope. So on this one you can start to see some of the clearing that's going around the areas that will be flooded in preparation for the work on that next year. So here another couple interesting issues I encountered on the way down. In this case there's a railway crossing with a stop sign, and as you can see here in a second, the car completely misses the stop sign and continues right through it, although after it crossed the tracks it does recognize what happened and does stop here. So interesting one I hadn't come across before. I'm guessing that's a map issue as well that hopefully will be fixed in the next version. The next one is a common issue that was happening in the previous version where it wouldn't slow down quick enough for changes in speed. So here you can see I'm going 110, entering the 70 zone, followed by the 50 zone in construction, and still going probably over 100 when I pass the 50 sign. So clearly not even close to acceptable. That needs to be fixed pretty darn quickly. Here's another strange new one that I hadn't noticed on any previous versions. When I get passed by a car, the car swerves to the right as if to dodge out of the way. This next one's a good save by autopilot. Let's see if we can spot it. This is half speed. Deer jumps across the road and autopilot slows down just in time. Another positive on 10.12.2 is the performance in the rain. It seems to be better than it was previously. I'm not sure if I'm imagining that or not, but it handled it quite well. It did switch back and forth between regular autopilot and FSD a couple times, but seems to be able to handle more rain than the previous version did. In general, there were more phantom braking demerits on the way down on the new version, but that's probably to be expected with something new. Hopefully that'll improve even without any updates, as the previous one seems to have done. Another interesting observation is that it got better the closer we got to civilization. So same with the previous version, it got worse the further north we got. So I'm guessing just less Teslas up there to test it out. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Please join me next time in our search for premium electrons, and like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. Thank you very much. Have a good day.